I sent you were two, and they're easy to read, and I'll give you the references on them. That people, one of them is by Barry Kaufman from July 15, 2014, and the other one is from Farnham Street, which is a guy named Farnham, from July 30th of 2012. And each one, you can all go look at them because they're pretty straightforward. The deliberate practice article really redefines clearly what deliberate practice is and nicely consolidates it. And if you read the book on Peak, they will, at one point they talk about Ben Franklin not knowing how to become a better chess player. Well, it turns out he did deliberate practice because his father kept criticizing his writing. So he took some of the best essayists in Britain at the time and tore their articles apart, rewrote them, scrambled the results that he wrote down, and then 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, tried to put them back together so he could clarify his writing better and better, which clearly happened along the way. But the most important things, I think, are defining it is understanding it's hard work. It's taking and really trimming at your edges where you are very uncomfortable and trying to expand them to areas that you understand. It may not change your comfort zone, your comfort completely, but you understand them and you work better with them. And I think that really helps you overcome fear that something doesn't work, that you can actually rework something very quickly just because you've done it so many times.
Bob, do you think that, I agree with you, that it helps you overcome that rush to fear and be scared and evaluate, oh shit, I've never felt like this. I've lost it. It helps you overcome that if you put yourself in that position, founder a little bit, and through hard work on your part and some good coaching, which I think is where the coaching really pays off in times like that, you've come through it several times, so it keeps you from fearing that step back because you realize that step back is just as essential as the step forward you want to make in the learning process. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And, one of the things that you've alluded to, and I'll hit it right now, is the coaching impact on this can be very important. And some proteges of K. Anders Ericsson, who's the guy who, with others, have really pushed this idea of deliberate practice being so important, basically said, look, it's not just deliberate practice. It's having somebody who can mentor you through the rough spots. And they feel that the concept of 10,000 hours can be trimmed by as much as 2,500 hours simply by having a mentor and good coaching. So it really does make a difference. But that's on the journey to expertise. And they say that the trim really comes as you approach the expert journeyman as opposed to the true expert, which is further down the track. The article is, I said, worth reading because it really makes the points very solidly about what deliberate practice is and understanding the components. The other article I've read the actual original piece that the Kaufman reviews, and he does a really nice review and points out that it isn't as harsh as it sounds on deliberate practice. Basically, what the other study did was what's called a meta-analysis, and we use a lot of those in medicine. And mostly it helps you understand broad concepts better and also places where you need to go back and really look carefully. And it turns out that the meta-analysis, although it involved a lot of studies, did something interesting. It broke down where they expected to see improvement from deliberate practice being very important into what are called, they call it 3 different levels. Very predictable activity, minimally predictable activity, and moderate predictable activity. Minimal predictive activity would be a airline or emergency. No matter how many times you do practice in a simulator, it may not be the same thing as you experience in real life when it happens. And the very predictable, they said running was a very predictable thing. So I would put ours in moderately predictable. And when you break down what they did on that, 1, they didn't study shooting, and 2, they only had 8 studies involved in that, and the numbers in them weren't all that big. And in that position of talking about sports in general, that's all those things together, they talked about deliberate practice having an 18% to 28% effect. The piece that comes in after this that is really interesting, and Kaufman alludes to it, or actually doesn't allude to it, he actually says it, is that there are many other things that go into the remaining 80-some-odd% or 70-some-odd% of what makes for expert performance. There is a subsequent study done in 2016 and reported actually early this year that talks about those other things and really tried to evaluate them. And what they broke that down is saying all those other things that happen in your life and in your personality that might influence deliberate practice have been broken down in pieces in research over many years. But they looked at the whole thing, and they said, we want to look at conscientiousness, which is the tendency to control behaviors in service of personal goals. That is, how dedicated are you to achieve your goals and give everything else up to get there. Grit, which is the tendency to pursue long-term goals with perseverance and passion. The third is self-control, which is the ability to control thoughts and emotions and resist temptations in order to perform desired and inhibit undesired behaviors. Very important for us. They did some other breakdowns, and what it came down to is that conscientiousness and grit and self-control all played very big roles in getting deliberate practice done. So these are the other things that make for not only the use of deliberate practice, but probably the intensity of it as well. They did make a comment that it's selfish people who can ignore their community and their team to their own personal goals that might also do really well at deliberate practice. And I think from that perspective, we have to understand ourselves a little bit better and how our families and spouses and our friends might sometimes look at us as being a little off the wall. The key thing is to understand that in reality, and actually subsequent articles even after Peak was published and subsequent interviews, Anders Ericsson said, the 10,000-hour thing is important, but it's not an absolute. It's also got lots of other things that go into it. And they say that in their book. They just don't say it as clearly as Kaufman actually put it in his article. And it's spread throughout the book. So I think that...
And Kaufman is more of he's looking at it from more of a creative standpoint as opposed to a skill-building thing, right?
Yeah. I heard an interesting comment on creativity, and you may reflect on this. And that was that creativity occurs at the junction between art and science. Yes.
I agree with that.
You've got to look at things with a hard eye, and then you have to be able to jump off the edge of the cliff, as it were, to try something new to deal with it. And that's the creativity. So those are the key things.
And the willingness to not be concerned about failing by trying those things jumping off the cliff is where true creativity really comes in.
Yes. There's a great discussion of that particular aspect of creativity in 7 Days in Utopia. David Cook is a PhD psychologist playing golf. But his book, the movie is good, but the book is infinitely better. And he is a Texan. Give you credit.
Yes,
for
sir.
that.
He was at one of our advanced classes last year.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I think I remember reading that. But he has in that book a great discussion of how creativity occurs when you're faced with something you have no idea what to do with it. And you have to you have to take all your experience and apply it, but you also have to be willing to do some things very differently than you've ever done before. And that gives you wonderful insight into your own behavior as well as to how to adjust your performance to circumstances. Wind, a really good target setter who pulls lots of tricks on you, or anxiety, which is how do you overcome it? And you almost have to double down because the timing gets screwed up when you become anxious. So that's, I think, a summary of those two pieces, but they're very easy to read, so I recommend them to you. But Kaufman takes the run at this meta-analysis on deliberate practice with a very appropriately jaundiced eye. Not off the mark completely, but it's not so on the mark that you have to ignore deliberate practice. It's part of the puzzle.
And the deliberate practice thing, and Erickson did talk about all of the other physiological characteristics that can aid in people becoming expert in sports. He talked about that in almost every study that they talked about. They didn't take it to the extreme that Kaufman did. Mm-hmm. I go back to, from a creative standpoint, I go back to the comment I made when you first began to talk, and that is, the more times you've been in a situation where you absolutely positively didn't know what to do, but you chose a direction and you believed in it and you jumped off the cliff. The more times you've done that, and the more times you've failed and learned and succeeded and learned, the easier it is for you to become a creative person, because it eliminates the anxiety in the decision. Am I on the right page?
Absolutely. And each one of us, better or for worse, is a little different in that regard.
Yeah. It's public speaking 101. Mm-hmm. It's just public speaking 101. I mean, you can be a master of the material, and you can have the conversation with 2 people in the room, but can you have the conversation with 200 people in the room? And you're going to be a little more anxious the first time you do it. You're going to be a whole lot less anxious after you've done it 100 times. Yep. And I'm a prime example of that. I mean, I've been looking for frantically an old 8-track tape, an old, I don't remember what kind of tape it was, of the first level 1 that I gave at Dave Fisher's place up in Detroit with Jerry Meyer, and they were filming it. Pat Liskey was in that level 1. I gave him his level 1, and it was the first time for me to have to get up and talk about it. I was talking about chokes and loads, which I knew backwards and forwards better than anybody in the room and pretty much anybody in the country, thanks to Bob Brister and his mentorship with me, and his encouraging me to go beyond what he had done in shot stringing and actually show people how wide the patterns really were at different distances. But I got through that so fast. Jerry said, you were cutting some people on the first row. You were talking so fast, you were strafing them with words. You need to learn to slow down a little bit. He was a lot better at doing that than I was, but he mentored me into making me pause. He'd stand up in the back of the room when I was going too fast, and I'd slow down. And that's how I learned that pausing is not a bad thing. It allows you to put emphasis on things that need to have emphasis on. So I want to share with you, Bob, what I got from Das Bourgeois after he read the Peak book. Mm-hmm. He sent me this email. Deliberate practice, ! Solitary practice. Mm-hmm. The road to being an expert is often lonely. Because when everybody else is out having fun, you're over there working. I've talked to Dean Trout about this, which I'll come to you in a minute, Dean, about your reflections. But the first one was deliberate practice, ! Solitary practice. Practice by yourself. Go out and get Angel to pull you targets and work specifically on them with a goal. Must have a great coach! To be good, tremendous amount of effort over years. You must practice the correct way. Top Gun School or 74 Ranch. You've got to push outside your comfort zone, which is where me and Vicki and Brian come in. We're constantly pushing people out of their comfort zone. Sometimes they're a little more reluctant than others, but we push them anyway. The use of the simulators, watching the Knowledge Vault videos. I talked about how the quarterback from Louisiana State or LSU somewhere sputtered out in less than 3 years, and how Tom Brady was 114th in the draft and he spent more time in the film room than anybody else, and ended up being one of the best all-time quarterbacks that there was. It's how much time he spent in that film room, which enabled him to recognize the patterns of the defenses so much more quickly, which enabled him to achieve great performances. Watching the Knowledge Vault videos, DOS, is really big. That's all in capital letters. You've got to develop your skills through practice, deliberate practice. And so the interesting thing is that this was the concept behind the original coaching hour. People that are in the OSP program getting together once a month and talking about their experiences and how they're working through things, and it enables us to exchange ideas with them and keep them going and keep them learning things. Dean, what was your impression and anybody else out there, what was your impression, Dean Trout, on the Peak book? You wrote me a note, texted me, and said it's a whole lot better the second and third time through.
Yeah. Yeah, you really get to pick the wheat from the chaff when the more you read it, or in this case, listen to it. I'm right now. I've just been listening to it when I've been driving. I haven't been able to take too many notes as far as things that popped out to me. The next time I read it or listen to it, I'm going to sit down with a notepad and pull out the juicy parts. But I don't find anything particularly new here, but I do find that it's putting a name to stuff that you've already taught me, or you've talked about here before. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Larry Peck sent me a 8-page document of things that he pulled out of the Knowledge Vault from 2014 forward. And it's not all of them, it's just some of them. And basically he's saying the same thing. I mean, you guys have been saying this all along. He highlighted things that we've been talking about and things that meant a lot to him. And eventually I'll get to the point to where I have enough time to read some of those. But we've been saying this all along. But like you said, we didn't know the phrase mental representation and patterns and and we'd never looked at it in terms of long and short-term memory. We always looked at it in terms of conscious and subconscious. And some people, when you say subconscious to them, they shut down. There's a metal gate that comes over their face, and their ears plug up. They turn into knots, and they don't want to hear about it. They think it's some spooky thing. They don't know that you build your own subconscious habits and traits. But referring to it as long and short-term memory makes it a little easier for people to digest those things.
Yeah.
Was that what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there wasn't anything, like I said, there wasn't anything new here. This just really kind of just confirmed what you've already taught. The stuff I'm pulling out of the Knowledge Vault. A couple of weeks ago I called you and told you I'd found the video about the pre-shot routine, pre-shot and post-shot, and of course it was.
He calls me up in the middle of the day and said, "Hey, I just found this neat video on the Knowledge Vault called The 3 Routines of Sporting Clays." I said, "Yeah, it's only about 8 years old. You might want to try looking at something else besides the forum."
There was a guy on there that looked a lot like you, but he was a little less wrinkly.
Oh, careful now. Oh, my. Yeah, Dean Olson was on that one.
Yeah.
That was the day. That was the year he shot so well.